What's up, Gator Nation? Welcome to the latest Geo recruiting show. Zach Albaverdi, Corey Bender, and Keith Niebuhr here. Keith joining us live from Nashville for the On3 Elite Series going down this week, a second year running. But we're going to talk official visits this week as the Gators have their first official visit weekend of the summer season coming up. 14 guys scheduled to come to campus as we come to you guys right now. So we'll get into some of those visitors to watch, some of the important guys making their way to Gainesville. And as always, make sure that you're subscribed to Gators Online to keep up with all of Keith and Corey's coverage. Guys, official visit weekend is finally here. Before we get to some of the visitors, just what are your early thoughts about the visitor list that Florida's put together so far?
Yeah, I think it's pretty solid, man. I think we kind of went into this cycle thinking there's a lot of uncertainty at Florida, understandably so, and we thought maybe some kids might be hesitant to maybe schedule OVs with Florida. Maybe they want to see and maybe do it later in the year based off how their season looks. But it's a star-studded list, man. I mean, most of the kids are blue chip prospects. You have kids at key positions. You know, Zaire Addison's a kid that comes to mind, a priority offensive lineman. Antoine Hill, a quarterback who they've been kind of going back and forth with. So I think overall it's a very solid list. And as the summer goes along, even more talented guys come in town. So it's a pretty strong summer official visit slate for the Gators.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I mean, I think it's going to be better in a couple of weeks. I think the June 14th visit weekend, Corey would probably agree, is significantly better. But you do have some key pieces in this. You know, you're talking about the offensive line with Zaire Addison, the tackle that Corey mentioned. He might be Florida's number one overall offensive line target. On the defensive line, you've got Myron Charles, who's leaning toward FSU, but maybe Florida can make a big move this weekend. That's a guy we're watching. An edge player that Florida seems to like a lot, Javian Hilson. We'll get into more later on him, but he might not be rock solid to FSU, so Florida could maybe do something. He's committed to FSU, could do something there. There's some solid receivers, some good defensive linemen. Tight end is an important position this weekend as Florida looks to maybe take two in this class. So it's solid. There's just not like a ton of star power. I think it looks like the June 14th weekend is probably the biggest, but it's still big for Florida. They've only got 5 commitments, Zach. It's time to get things rolling, and I think they know that.
No doubt. Now, obviously, a lot of guys to maybe highlight on this list. Florida is still looking for a quarterback in the 2025 class, and they got Antoine Hill coming to campus. What are y'all's thoughts on that recruitment going into this? And is there a way – obviously, Memphis is in the picture – could things materialize where there's a scenario where he does end up in Florida's class?
Yeah, I kind of do. It's funny. We did our mock classes this morning. He's the one I put as my mock quarterback as far as who I think's in the class. And I say that just based off down the road in the fall where Florida, I think they're going to beat just based off where their schedule is. Right now, Memphis, that's who we're kind of Keith and I are leaning towards. That's the school that's been recruiting the hardest, the school with the most momentum. But Florida's been involved from the start. I know communication has been kind of limited over the past month. There was a stretch where for about 2 weeks, conversations didn't take place with them. So we thought maybe the OV could get canceled. But, the week we're out at a 7-on-7, it was that morning when Florida reached back out. And a big part with him is just kind of looking at DJ Lagway's situation. I know his family is heavily evaluating whether they want to go to a school and kind of sit back and sit behind him, or do they want to go to a school like Memphis, where obviously NIL, I know that's been brought with them. They have a pretty interesting NIL package they have over there. And opportunity, too. Memphis, obviously, next season, they're losing a few quarterbacks, so Antoine Hill will have a good opportunity to play. But I think when it's all said and done, I think Florida does have a chance to kind of sneak back in just based off where their quarterback board stands today.
Yeah, I agree with Corey. I mean, they could make a move. I mean, he needs to feel – Corey knows – he needs to feel wanted. He's feeling wanted by Memphis, quite frankly. It's interesting because as a 4-star guy – he doesn't have a lot of the big schools after him. I don't know what the answer for that is. I don't know the reason. But Memphis is locked in, and, Memphis has been a pretty good QB school recently. They've got a guy that's going to be a 4-year starter this year, and he's put up big numbers, and he's going to be riding off into the sunset after this next season. Sorry, I got construction behind me. But so that job is going to be open. So he's saying, hey, look, man, I can go to Memphis. I get there in January. I'm competing for the starting job on day one. I might not get it, but I'm competing. I'm getting reps. And he knows if he goes to Florida, that's not going to be the case. I mean, yeah, it's going to be an open competition, but DJ Lagway is already number 2. I mean, they didn't bring DJ Lagway in, and Florida didn't. Whoever the NIL situation isn't enormous because they expect this guy to be competing for a starting job. They expect DJ Lagway to go take it. So Antoine Hill's thinking, well, when would I be a starter? When would I be able to be a starter? And it's a few years down the road if that's the case. Now, if DJ Lagway's really good, you only got to wait a couple years. But what if DJ Lagway needs 3 years at Florida? 3 years as a player. So forget about this coming year. But suppose it's 25, 26, 27, and he's thinking, Antoine Hill, maybe I don't play till 2027. That's a long way off. So that's what Florida's having to overcome here. In the meantime, they're recruiting 2 other guys harder. Keelan Russell, the SMU commit out of Dallas. He'll visit later this in June. And then Tramel Jones, the Florida State commit from Jacksonville. And as of right now, Florida expects him to officially visit. Nothing's officially set, but they expect him to visit. So, I don't know. Antoine Hill's an interesting one. He's see and hear a lot from Florida this weekend.
No doubt. And then obviously the Gators are going to have some receivers in town as well, as they're looking to add some wide receivers to their 2025 class. They got 1 committed right now. What do you guys think about the wide receivers that Florida is bringing in and maybe their chances with them coming into this visit?
Yeah, no, I think overall, Nathan Montgomery, that's a kid Florida's been in a good spot with for a while. But Keith and I have discussed this a lot. It's a deep wide receiver board, and he is feeling like a priority for Florida. When he did go up there several weeks, probably early at the start of spring, they told him, hey, we want to build this wide receivers class around you. He really got like that red carpet treatment, was told all the great things. But as time goes on, Penn State's another school in the mix. You have Alabama, Miami. I think Florida's right there at the top for him, but it's going to be interesting how much they prioritize him going forward, just because they are sitting well with other wide receivers. And one of them is Joshua Moore. He's a top 100 prospect on 3 out of in the South Florida area. His recruitment's a little bit more fluid. I know Miami's in the mix, Florida State. I think official visits are really going to kind of have a big impact on where he ends up. But that's another big body kid, 6'3.5", really physically imposing. A guy that Billy Gonzalez loves. He loves guys with the size on the perimeter. So I think Florida has a good chance with both those kids. I just think the official visits are going to determine a lot with both of them, and each of them are taking several of them. So it's kind of a wait and see with both of Florida City in a good spot going into the weekend.
Yeah, Nathan Montgomery, what we think Florida and Penn State have official visits, so those are clearly 2 schools to watch there. For me, it's just kind of a matter with him, like how hard is Florida going to push? They got 1 receiver committed right now, Josiah Abdullah, who, by the way, was recently reoffered by Alabama, and it's my understanding from talking to somebody yesterday, he's probably going to take some visits. Then they've got, it's a crowded, like Corey said, a crowded and deep wide receiver board. So where does Nathan Montgomery fit into that? Florida's making a lot of these guys feel like priorities, and that's smart because then you're not circling back later and, oh, yeah, we liked you all along. They're showing them they like them. The downside of that is they've got about 10 to 12 kids that think they're the top guy. And so that you have to do that sometimes. But where does he fit in? If he fits into their plans and they really want him, well, I'm with Corey. I think they have a shot with Nathan Montgomery. Joshua Moore is an interesting one, though, because I don't hear really much about Florida at all. I interviewed him earlier this year, and he talked up Florida a little bit, but I think the most of the chatter is about FSU and Georgia, and I think they see each other as the top competition there. That's a big body guy. He could probably play tight end too, quite frankly, although I don't think he wants to. But, 1 commit, probably 3 spots to fill. A lot of good players out there. But, again, you probably lead for C.J. Ingram. That would be 2 spots if you got him. You may end up getting Vernell Brown. That would be 3. That doesn't leave you with too many spots. So they've got some tough choices to make. And sometimes you sit on a guy and wait on a guy and say, sorry, I got another truck going by. Sometimes you wait on a guy and you say, all right, well, we can get this guy later and we're going to fight for another guy. Well, then that other guy picks somewhere else and you circle back and the kid you waited on says, well, I can't wait for you guys. I'm going to, so it's a game of chicken. It's a constant game of chicken, basically.
Yeah.
But Nathan Montgomery, Zach, I agree with Corey. I think that's a guy that's probably among the 7 or 8 most realistic receiver targets.
No doubt. And then obviously you guys mentioned him at the top of the show, but Addison coming into town for an official visit. The Gators signed 6 offensive linemen in their last recruiting class, if you count, the commit who reclassified from 25, and then obviously Jason Zandamela coming in as a transfer who was a class of 2024 prospects. So 6 freshmen coming in, and then they also have the guys that redshirted. So Florida is young on the offensive line. It'd be interesting to see how many linemen they can take in this class. But I imagine Addison's got to be at the top of the list, Corey.
Yeah, for sure. I think right now when you look at his recruitment, Florida's probably the school with the most momentum in this recruitment, just based off he had 2 spring visits, 2 over a 3-day span. Obviously, he's coming town for the OV. But he is a kid who's taken a number of OVs. I think he has 5 or 6 scheduled for the summer, a few midweeks. He was already at UCLA. So it's a kid who's really doing his research, really kind of getting a feel for all these schools. High character kid. You can tell he's really kind of taking a business approach to this, really digging into each school and really knows what he's talking about too. So I think Florida right now is probably the school with the most buzz. But like you said, it's a summertime. A lot of visits are still to take place, and it's going to be interesting if Florida can hold on. You know, his old teammate Gregory Smith is obviously on the roster. That helps. And I know Tyler Williams, or his teammates, a 4-star receiver, that another receiver Florida's looking at, is in the mix too. And I think that can help down the line depending on where Florida's class sits. But yeah, I just think Florida has to keep chipping away at them. It's going to take some time and effort, but I think Florida's sitting in a great spot going into the weekend. That's all you can ask for.
You know, when you look at offensive linemen, you're looking at body first, piece of clay. He's got it. He's 6'4" and 290, and you're thinking, well, that's kind of short to play tackle, but there's a lot of 6'4" tackles in the NFL that are all pro. It's more about body type, and he's built like a tackle. He's got, I believe he told me I'm getting this right, 85-inch reach. So wow. He's got long arms. What's the other thing you're looking for? Footwork, right? Corey knows this. Corey's evaluated many more guys than I have. And so this is someone who runs the 100, I think runs the 100 and 200 in high school. So he's pretty fast he's fast for a big guy. So he's got the piece of clay, he's got the body. And then Corey can attest to this, Zach. When you interview the guy, he is highly intelligent. This is a smart dude now. He's got a top 9, and he's going to have a decision like in August. So he knows there's not really a top 9, but he's going to give everybody a fair look. He's going to officially visit a bunch of schools in June and sneak in some unofficial visits to Michigan and Ohio State. So he's got everybody in the world after him, but 2 visits to Florida this spring. He likes the 2 offensive line coach system. He likes that Florida's right down the road. And his good buddy, Gregory Smith from the last cycle, is a freshman safety. Florida, he likes that. Florida, Corey's right. Florida's got some momentum. They've got to seize on that this weekend. I wouldn't expect them to do anything this weekend, but they've got to figure out a way to seize on that and set the bar really high, because he's got some big visits coming up.
And no Zach, doubt. Real quick, you added something too about how many offensive linemen they're going to take. And that was the hardest thing when we did our mock classes this morning, was looking at Florida's offensive line targets and kind of picking them. I only put 2 in the class for now, and I actually combined tackle and interior, because I think Florida, obviously, like you said, Zach, they signed a lot last cycle, and I think portal is going to be another focus for them. That's what makes it this year kind of tough. We don't know what the portal is going to look like at the end of this year. So, yeah, like you said, a lot of youth on the roster already, but I think Addison clearly, at least right now, looks like the top guy.
No doubt. And then before we go over to the defensive side, I do want to talk about the 2 tight ends that are coming in. Florida doesn't have a tight end committed right now in the 2025 class. Obviously landed a stud last year in Amir Jackson, who's getting ready to enroll. What do you guys think about the 2 tight ends that are coming in, and could one of them end up in the class eventually?
Yeah, I think overall I'm pretty close, in my opinion, for putting in a prediction for Tayshawn Gelsey. That's the kid out of Jacksonville Riverside. He already has a commitment date for late July. I think it'll depend on how much Florida wants him. I think that's the thing that we're kind of waiting to see. Florida's been evaluating him for a while. They got him on campus. He was actually a receiver early on in the process, but Florida kind of likes him. Kind of like how they liked Arlis Boardingham, kind of like that athlete tight end who can play a little bit of H-back. So I think Florida's probably in the best spot there. I know the other OV he has is Wake Forest, and if you're a Jacksonville kid, you grow up in Florida, and you have Wake Forest beat you out and you want him, that's obviously a troubling sign. So I think if Florida wants him, I think they can get him. Mekhi Jones, that's another one too, out of Mississippi. That's probably the kid they've been chasing probably the longest, I think, since last summer when they offered him. From my knowledge, Florida was the only OV he had scheduled as far as a week and a half ago. So that's another kid I think will determine how this OV goes. But Florida's right there at the top for him. He's one kid that hasn't really put a decision timeline out. But if Florida knocked out of the park this weekend, if someone was to commit out of left field, he's one that kind of comes to mind. But I think Russ Callaway has options, and those are 2 of the guys that are, pretty high on the board with mutual interest.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, first of all, Florida they're leaning toward taking 2 tight ends. At last check, they were taking 2. They only took 1 last year. At various times during last year's cycle, they thought about taking 2, but ended up ultimately only taking 1. And now it looks like as of today, they're going to take 2. And that makes me think they're going to green light to Sean Gelsey from Jacksonville, and maybe this weekend. They're trying to build a class, and they've got some challenges because they haven't been winning. Let's just be frank about this. And so that presents a challenge, and a lot of kids want to see some results this fall. So to get a few guys on board and make other people realize, hey, man, they do have something pretty good going on. I'm willing to jump in the boat with these guys. So Gelsey is a guy, if you push this weekend, I think Corey wrote it. I mean, maybe the only other real team to watch right now, the biggest team to watch, is maybe Wake Forest, who, by the way, has historically done great in Jacksonville. It is a solid program considering it's Wake Forest. And no, I mean that in respect to them, quite frankly. Remember, they beat FSU 3 years in a row once, but so they, I think if Florida pushes for him, that could be a guy that maybe jumps in. Now, he's got a commitment date of July 13th. Maybe they convince him to move it up. But that's if they push it. I tend to think they will because of the 2 spots that we think they're going to fill. The other one, I guess, I don't know whether it's pronounced Micah or Mekhi Jones, but like Corey said, LSU, Florida battle. But Ole Miss, I know in a recent interview, he didn't really mention them much with Corey, but they still lead in the On3 recruiting prediction machine, and they're still an in-state school. I just need to find out what's going on at Ole Miss, but I would never count out one of those 2 schools in that state for a guy. But if he has a good visit to Florida, perhaps they can take the lead on that one too. So I think I'm not really that concerned about that position. It's a big board, and it's a developmental position. So a lot of times it's a mid to high 3-star you're taking. But I think Arliss Sportingham was a 3-star, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a developmental position. You're trying to project. Russ Callaway seems, people talk about Jabbar Jaluk's evaluations. Well, Russ Callaway's a guy, I trust his evaluations, maybe more than anybody's on that staff, quite frankly.
Yeah, and obviously, they got Amir Jackson coming in, so not unnecessarily a need to get somebody that can come in and make an immediate impact, because I think we think that Amir is going to be able to do that pretty soon in his UF career. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the ball. The Gators have Jalen Wiggins committed on the defensive line. He's their top-rated commit in their 2025 class, and they're bringing in 2 more defensive linemen this weekend on official visits, Myron Charles and Jarquez Carter. Carter out of Newberry, Florida, so a local prospect. What are your thoughts on these 2 guys entering this weekend and their chances of ending up in Florida's class?
Yeah, I think with Myron Charles, Florida's been kind of, pushing for a while. Even when Sean Spencer was there, they offered him a while ago. But I think going into this weekend, I think you still have to favor Florida State. They've been the school with the most momentum for several months now. Even when Keith and I spoke to him, I think it was back in February, Florida State was a school often mentioned the most. So Florida's pushing. I know they've made up some ground in recent weeks. He's been to Florida a few times, so he's familiar with the school. But I think it's going to have to take a lot for Florida or any other school to kind of surpass the Noles. And based off from what I remember, the Seminoles have the final OV of the summer too, which lasting impressions we all know. And I'm guessing he probably scheduled that on purpose, kind of gave FSU that last shot. That's why I kind of took it. So I think Florida has to really knock it out of the park with him. Jarquez Carter, he's another kid with a pretty crowded offer sheet. Florida jumped in a little bit late, but, he's not too far up the road up in Newberry, and I think Florida has a good shot with him. They've been plugging away and got him on campus a few times this spring. I think it made up some ground. He kind of watches what he says a lot when it comes to schools. It's hard to get a real read on who's kind of out front. He mentions about a handful of schools each time, but I think Florida has a good shot to kind of keep him close to home.
That would be big.
Yeah, I'll talk about Carter mostly. So, yeah, obviously he's at Newberry. He can get to Florida anytime he wants. He's got some real good relationships with coaches on the staff, including an assistant defensive line coach, Lewis McLeod at Florida, who is a Gainesville native. I think he played, I hope I'm getting this right, Lewis. I think he played at Eastside, so he's got pretty good knowledge of the Gainesville area. And also once trained Jarquez Carter. So they have a really strong relationship. But Jarquez thought the Florida defensive line last year was a little too much into gap control. And he sees himself more as an aggressive, pin your ears back kind of guy. Whatever. But that's what he thinks. And that's what he saw with his own eyes. And so he wants to be assured by Florida that he is going to be a system fit. He doesn't want to just go because he loves Florida and it's close to home. He's a smart kid. I mean, this is what it's all about. This is when people say, well, how can a kid from Newberry not go to Florida? This is why. These are tough choices. He's got to make sure he fits into what they do. So one thing we know, if you watch Tulane play, they were pretty damn aggressive on the defensive line under Gerald Chapman. And so Florida's probably going to be trying to sell him on that. Look, this is going to be more of you getting ahead, getting in that backfield. Who knows, right? I mean, I don't know. But that's what they're going to sell him on. And if he buys it and he believes in what they're selling, then I think Florida's chances go way up. But he says he's going to take his time. I know there's people on the message board that are like, well, hey, big weekend this weekend. Maybe Florida can get him in the boat. But he has been adamant about the fact he doesn't want to make an announcement until after he officially visits Ohio State in the fall. So we'll see. I mean, Corey's right. Florida was a little late to the party, but Gerald Chapman really got in there quick and made up for lost time. And then obviously he's got the prior relationship with Lewis McLeod. So I think Florida, it's conceivable that he ends up in the class. Myron Charles is interesting. Earlier this year, he said the gap from Florida State to Florida had closed significantly. But then recently a bunch of picks for Florida State came in, and they're not putting him in for no reason. They're putting him in because somebody at Florida State is giving them the idea, somebody connected to that program, that this could be a guy that ends up in that class. So that looks like that's going to be a challenge. And then also you've got other schools involved with him, including Texas, which, huge NIL, real organized NIL. And so that's somebody to watch too. So there's a lot to shake out with Myron Charles, but Florida could maybe get a boost this weekend.
No doubt. And then, you guys have already mentioned him last week on the Geo Recruiting Show, but Christian Gass, a linebacker out of Georgia, scheduled to come in for an official visit. This is a big-time target for the Gators, and I think important to get him in Gainesville. What are your thoughts on his recruitment heading into this weekend and kind of where the Gators fit in?
Yeah, I kind of view it not in the same sense as like their recruitment's mirrored as far as the exact same way, but it's kind of like Zaire Addison, where I think Florida is, one of the hot teams with Christian Gass, but I think it's going to take some time before he makes his decision. He's a coveted kid. You got Georgia in the mix. I know Kentucky's getting an OV, and I think it's a guy that's going to continue to kind of rise throughout the fall. He's a big kid, 6'4", true Mike linebacker that Florida really likes. So right now, I think Florida, in my opinion, might be positioned best. I believe Keith talked to him too. I think he said Tennessee was in the mix as well. But I think we're gonna have to wait and kind of see how this folds. I know he wants to kind of see. He's gonna make a decision in July. So even if he did pick Florida, it'll be, can they weather the storm in the fall when they have that difficult schedule? Can they keep on to him when Georgia and other schools, would be trying to flip him? So that's my biggest question, his recruitment. I think Florida is sitting in a good spot, but long term, it might be tough to kind of hold on to them, in my opinion. So I think Florida has a good opportunity, though. They're definitely right there.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Gass, the guy I'm looking at, and I'm saying Florida's got a real shot with him. Obviously, he said Florida and Tennessee a week ago were the two schools probably recruiting him the hardest. But that kind of changes day to day with kids, I mean, to be honest with you. But here's another program I'm watching, Georgia. We don't know where he sits on their board. And for a kid in the Peach State, if Georgia puts the foot on the gas, you've always got to be concerned. So that's going to be one of the – oh, God, that shouldn't really matter, but it does. It does. Just like if Georgia was recruiting a kid at Buchholz High School in Gainesville and Florida put its foot on the gas late, it changes things. And so we'll have to see. And Georgia's also recruiting some other linebackers that Florida likes, including Tavion Wallace, who's going to visit later in June. So to me, that's the other team to really watch besides Tennessee. But Florida's got a real shot with Christian Gass. Good player.
No doubt. And then as we wrap up here, Florida's first official visit weekend is scheduled to start on May 31st. The Gators got a safety coming in as well that they'll be having on campus, Jalen Morgan, a guy that we've heard a lot about out of the state of Tennessee. Where does Florida stand right now with him, and what do they need to do on this visit to kind of really get at the top of his recruitment?
Yeah, I spoke to him a few days ago. Keith spoke to him early in the month, and I just reconnected with him. And it's the same thing. Florida's in that top 2, top 3 range. Conversations with Will Harris are going extremely well. Florida's right there, man. I kind of feel like they're like the dark horse school with him. He's considering about a handful of schools right now. But I think overall, Florida has a good shot. They offered just in the spring. They came in, I wouldn't say they came in late, but they came in right before his recruitment really kind of went national, and really some more offers came in. But I think Florida has a good shot. I think so as far as out-of-state targets, he's one of the ones that doesn't get mentioned most. that could end up being the class, just depending on how his OB is set out. So I think overall Florida has a good shot. He's definitely one of the guys to kind of monitor closely. And Florida can kind of really set that bar this weekend.
When you look at the list of schools that are contending, there's not many that you look at and go, oh boy, I don't know about this one, man. I don't know, man. Ohio State, USC, Texas. There's not really those types of schools, quite frankly. So that makes me feel better about Florida's chances. Tennessee's the RPM favorite, but we haven't really heard that Tennessee mentioned a ton with him, Corey, I don't think.
No, last time we talked to him, I don't believe he mentioned Tennessee,
Yeah, so that's something to watch. And then Florida's got another safety in this weekend, safety corner, probably more safety, and that's Caleb Singleton out of Jacksonville, Fleming Island, and we think Florida probably leads for him. So it's going to be a busy weekend for them also in the secondary, feeling out where they fit in with Morgan. And then also, can they put the nail in the coffin? Do they push for Caleb Singleton? We've heard that they really wanted him. Things change by the week in recruiting. But if that's the case, if they really and truly want him and the Gators push this weekend, I like where they sit related to the competition.
All right, now 2 final questions for you guys as we wrap up this preview. I want to ask first, who is the prospect that Florida has the most ground to make up with? We view as maybe the longest of the long shots that Florida really could make a move with or needs to make a move with. Obviously, Hilson might be the obvious choice because he's committed to FSU. But which prospect would you guys say, or maybe a couple?
It's funny. I actually just wrote this last week. Myron Charles for me. I just think, like you said, I could go with Javion Hilson. He's committed to FSU. I think that's the easy one, like you said, Zach. But I think same thing. Myron Charles, just 2 guys with obviously the FSU momentum. It's really, I don't even think it's really much what Florida's not doing. Obviously the relationships are strong with Coach Chapman, and he's feeling like he loved the demonstration they gave him about how he can make an early impact in Gainesville. So I think Florida's done a good job. It's just how strong his interest is in Florida State, and like I said before, with them getting the final OV, even if these other schools do impress, I think that's going to be difficult to overcome.
All right, I'll go with Josh Moore because I think with Hilson, we touched on this earlier. I don't even know that FSU thinks he's 100% locked in. So that one could go in any different direction. So I don't disagree that they have work to do, but that one seems wide open. So I'm going with Joshua Moore, the 4-star receiver from South Florida. Just so little buzz about Florida. And again, I don't think FSU and Georgia are really concerned about Florida, but maybe they can convince him this weekend because we know they want a big receiver in the class. He's 6'3.5", 6'4". They're recruiting Jamie French, who's a good size receiver. They're recruiting Caleb Cunningham, who's got size. They're recruiting Dallas Wilson, the 5-star, who's got good size. And Josh Moore's got good size. So we know they want a taller guy in the class. So how do you convince him to get in that boat? And Billy Gonzalez has had great success with taller receivers historically. And so we'll see. But to me, that's the guy, Joshua Moore. They got a real chance to make up some ground this weekend. And they have to, or they have no chance.
Good stuff. And then final question for you guys, probably the question that all listeners that are tuning in are going to want to know. And if you guys are not subscribed to Gators Online, make sure that you take advantage of the promo that we got going on right now. You go to sign up, type in the code UF1, and you can get 2 months of premium access for just $1. So make sure that you guys take advantage of that so that you can be on top of all of Corey and Keith's coverage this weekend. You might get an idea of where things stand for this question that I'm about to ask these two when you go sign up and join Gators Online. So make sure that you do that. The code is UF1. You can get 2 months of premium access for just $1. All right, final question for you guys, the one that fans want to know. Other than Chad Gasper and Jeremiah McLeod, the 2 Florida commits coming in this weekend, which recruit would you say is most likely to end up in Florida's class right now? I'm going to throw it to you, Keith, first.
All right, I'll say I think there's 2. Tashawn Gelsey, the tight end / athlete, and Caleb Singleton, the safety / corner. I think Florida is in a good spot with both. It's just going to come down to how hard they push. How bad do they want these guys? They show these guys they want them a lot. I think they're in, and maybe soon.
Good stuff.
I have the same exact 2, man. Yeah, so I'm in the same thing. I think with Gelsey, like he said before, he has a commitment day in July, but I think if Florida kind of pushes him and says, hey, man, we're involved with a lot of other tight ends too, but you're one guy we want, maybe that convinces him. And also Caleb Singleton, when he was here for the Orange and Blue game, he said, at that time, in mid-April, that he's thought about committing to Florida. So I know when you ask him, hey, is Florida your top school, he makes sure to kind of mention other schools too, LSU, Kentucky, other ones. But mutual interest is so high with him. He's one I think that could definitely be in Florida's class sooner than later. I'm with Keith on both of those.
All right. Well, there you guys have it from our recruiting experts at Gators Online. Florida getting ready for its first official visit weekend. 14 guys as we join you guys on this Wednesday. We'll see where things look at the end of the weekend. Make sure you stay locked with Gators Online for all the coverage coming out of those visits. We'll be back next week with a new show to recap how those visits went and preview the next official visit weekend. And again, as we mentioned at the top of the show, Keith is in Nashville as well for the On3 Elite Series event. So stay tuned for coverage from that event too. For Keith Niebuhr and Corey Bender, I'm Zach Albaverdi. We'll see you guys next week.